Those who have finished their salah, inshallah, come forward, mindful of those who are still praying salah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي هدانا إلى الصراط المستقيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين وعلى آله الطاهرين وأصحابه الكاملين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإن تعدوا نعمة الله لا تحصوها إن الله لغفور رحيم وقال تعالى وابيضت عيناه من الحزن فهو كظيم وقال تعالى بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى صدق الله العظيم وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من يرد الله به خير يصبه منه. My dear respected brothers, elders, ulama, brothers and sisters listening at home, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today's topic is mental health in Islam. I think we can all agree it's a topic which is not often heard from the mimbars and the pulpits in many masajid for different reasons, but I think it's relevant and essential that Muslim brothers, Muslim sisters know what Islam says about mental health. So I'm going to start with a question. When I say the word mental health, what does it mean to you? Anybody? Don't be shy. Anything what comes to your head. Don't say I think of mental health. Okay, anxiety, depression. Anybody else? Mental well-being of a person, very good. Stress. Okay, all the correct answers. It can be anything. There's no wrong answer. Everybody has a different perception, definition of mental health. But generally these are the things. Do you think of men or do you think of women? Both, yeah? There's a reason I asked that question. Inshallah, we'll delve into that maybe halfway through. So we all agree that it can affect men and women, yeah? We're all men sat here. The first part of the word, the first three letters is men as well. So sometimes what people try and do, they try and separate these issues. I don't have mental health issues. I've got medical issue, but I haven't got mental health. I've got spiritual issues, nazar, hasad, black magic, which according to our religion also exist. But I don't have mental health. People accept different things and they think you've got to separate them. Well, I say there's no need. A person can have a medical issue, anything. He could be suffering from cancer, he could have had a heart attack, stroke, and because of that he may suffer mental health issues. Do you agree? A person can go through black magic issues, nazar, hasad, spiritual issues, which are all in Quran, Hadith, Bukhari and Muslims, full of evidence, but they can also suffer mental health issues. Do we agree? Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. If somebody doesn't agree, you're more than happy to say, no, I don't actually agree with that. I don't actually agree with that. The Quran has Surah Jinn, Bukhari and Muslim mention black magic, but I don't agree that it can affect your mental health. We will also talk about the Anbiya alayhimus salam who suffered some of these issues, believe it or not. The greatest of men. Yeah, so for all us macho alpha males out there who think, I will never get mental health, I'm a man. I'm a man. The greatest of men suffered these things. Many of the Sahaba suffered these things. And then inshallah we will go through some of the myths about mental health. Misconceptions which are out there. Inshallah, time willing, So first and foremost, when people talk about mental health or psychological issues, generally it's related to the Western world. Yeah, people like Carl Rogers. Anybody heard of Carl Rogers? Freud? Okay, I don't expect you to. Somebody who's studied psychology maybe or counseling will know of these names. And when did mental health issues start in the West? It started with the immigrants. When people started migrating to the Americas, Europe, United Kingdom. So what happened, many of these immigrants came with really nothing materialistic. Some of them, they only came with the clothes on their back. And many of us can relate to our parents and grandparents who also came to this country with an empty suitcase, an empty wallet, and the clothes on their back. So what this led to was poverty. These people were coming in their hundreds and thousands, and this led to poverty. And what does poverty lead to? Mental health issues. So this is when in the West they really started looking at certain mental health issues. It wasn't just Asian people, Irish people, black people. So this is when they first started looking into different types of psychology, you could say, counseling. And mainly at that time there was 3 types of counseling. The first being career counseling. Now career counseling, what it did is looked at a person's skills, what you were good at, any sort of skills. You could be a builder, a plumber, could be a chef, a tailor, and then they used you for that. Why did they use you for that? Simply because a person who's also mentioned in psychology and counseling, Cresswell, he used to say that the easiest cure for mental health issues is getting a job. Yeah? It's something I myself, people who come to me for different reasons, I promote that because I've seen a busy person generally, I'm not going to say he'll never or she will never suffer from these things, there's less chances. An idle mind is the devil's workshop. That saying is very true. People who sit at home, they don't do nothing generally because they don't have a routine. People who work, even work with medical issues, mental health issues, you have a routine. You got to wake up early. You got to have lunch at this time. You got to finish at this time. You got to commute. You know the traffic. You know what's going to be expected at work. So generally, you're going to be, let's say, at least 75% up here. Mentally, you're going to be 75%. So this is why the career counseling helped, is get a job. Get a job, get out there, make yourself fit, use your skills. That was one way. The second type of counseling was the school counseling they used. School counseling typically was for students who had mental health issues or behavioral issues. But it wasn't the most effective. It was a simple case of, you're in trouble, go to the head teacher's office and have a word. There wasn't some really good outcome. And then the third type was the mental health counseling for specific issues, just regarding mental health. If they didn't fit in the first 2 categories, they would fit in the third. So this is a bit of history of how it started in the West. Now, when we look in the last 100 years or so, we will see 2 great wars happened, World War I, World War II. After these wars, this is when they started taking tests for people with mental health issues, psychological issues. As we know now, is very common that soldiers also suffer from these things, people who've been to war, people who may not have even fought, but they've seen things in war. So after the World War I, World War II, they started looking at these things, and this is when they realized that there are issues called mental health. In the 1930s in this country, we went through a few years of the Great Depression. Anybody heard of the Great Depression? Okay. The Great Depression was a time in this country, in Americas, when a lot of people were out of work. They didn't have jobs. So back to that rule I mentioned earlier, because they didn't have jobs, a lot of people suffered from anxiety, depression, and other things. But what this caused also was domestic issues. It caused issues between husband and wife, between father and son, mother and daughter. Because people had lost family members in World War I, World War II. And mostly at that time, you're talking 100 years plus, in this country it was mainly men that were working. So one of the reasons why women started working is because this country lost a lot of men. And then what happened in 1946? is the National Mental Health Act was passed. What this did though, it only dealt with treating people. Because it was a long time ago, science wasn't as flourishing as it is now. So it dealt with treating people, which helped people temporarily. What it didn't deal with was prevention. Yeah? Which is something we need to deal with now. How to prevent it from happening. And inshallah, like I said, if maybe towards the last 5-10 minutes, looking at Quran and Hadith and looking at modern ways, we will try and look at that, preventing it. Because the rule is, and the maxim is, prevention is better than cure. Prevention is better than cure. So back 70, 80 years ago, all they did was treating people. And they had many different ways. There's different ways to look at mental health. And one of the things they worked on was the brain. How the brain works. And the brain, for anybody who studied it, is a very complex. It's a muscle. And it's one of those things where I remember the co-founder of Microsoft, Paul Allen, he was once asked, how does a human brain work? Yeah, it sounds a very simple question and we think of a simple answer. And he himself is a scientist. He said, we don't even know how the brain of a worm works. The brain of a worm is going to be far smaller than the human brain. So the brain is very complex. And this is why at that time they couldn't work out how to prevent mental health issues, psychological issues from happening. Psychology, anybody who studied it, is very powerful. It's used in many things, not just in mental health issues. It could be used in a supermarket. Anybody know how supermarkets use it? Where's the bread and the milk in the supermarket? Always in the corner at the back. It's what most of us need. It's an essential. Why is it at the back of the store? Make you walk through and buy things which are non-essential. That's psychology. Another type of psychology in supermarket is what's always near the cashier. Whether it's a corner shop or it's Tesco, Aldi, what's always on the cashier, things which are non-essentials but little things which will make you buy, like chewing gum and tissues and kids' sweets and things. So when your kid's waiting in the queue and says, Mommy, Mommy, I want one of them. So this is a simple way of psychology. And when they use the power of psychology, they use it in many different ways. So for example, another extreme example is people who are addicted to drugs, yeah, which also affects mental health issues. So, not saying I know any drug dealers, but I hope you don't as well. Drug dealers, what they'll do first time, maybe second time, they'll give you what you want. Crack, weed, cocaine for free. Yeah? Not tried it, yeah? But if you ask somebody, the good drug dealers, they'll give it you free. Second time they give you free. They might give you free a few times. Why? Why are they giving you free something which costs a lot? One is to attract you, and another word with the A is addiction. Then they get you hooked onto it. So that's a drug dealer psychology. Yeah? You bet you never thought about that, drug dealers and psychology. But that is what they do. And I don't want to give too many examples, but there's many examples of that, how people use psychology for their own benefit. And a lot of businesses, salespeople will use it, get you hooked onto things. Mobile phones is another one. Yeah? Hopefully nobody's checked their mobile phone already. It's only been 10 minutes. But let's see how many people can last the hour without checking their mobile phone, including myself. Yeah, we're all addicted. So when the smartphones get more and more expensive, what happens? You have to pay. You have to pay because you want the latest. You don't want to go backward from a Samsung S8, S9 to, you don't want to buy S4, do you, next year? Same with the iPhone. Nobody goes backwards. So they know that we are addicted now. WhatsApp. Everybody's on WhatsApp. If you don't use any other social media, you definitely use WhatsApp. 99% of people. Now, a lot of these things which I've mentioned, even phones, drugs, different sort of things can cause mental health issues. Different types of mental health issues. It can cause anxiety for one. It can cause behavioral issues, ADHD, ADD, depression. Yeah, a lot of people who use social media, especially when they start getting thousands of followers, because we know the pictures on social media are always happy pictures. I can't remember the last time, not that I use a lot of social media, I saw somebody's picture who was crying on social media, who was sad. Ever seen that? Anybody seen that? Maybe I'm wrong. Generally, they're happy pictures because they're the best of pictures. Yeah, when you start with a tissue box, you don't put those pictures up because, so we look at that and we think, wow, his life is amazing, her life is amazing, and my life isn't. My life is never going to be like social media. Your life is never going to be like the social media. Why? Because we're bad people, we're evil people. Why will our life never be equivalent to the life of social media influencers? Those who show their happy pictures. It's a simple word. Because it's fake. Because it's not real. And in my observation, I have seen this, that I'm not going to make it a rule, but a lot of people who hit it big, yeah, on social media, who are always putting their pictures up and always acting like they're happy and romantic with their husband or wife, etc. I know a lot of these people who ended up in depression, anxiety and mental health issues. That's not one or two. Because sometimes I think, oh yeah, you had about 12,000 followers, where are you gone? Oh, deactivated. And then they come back and said, oh, the last 6 months I suffered from this. I'm not saying it's a rule, but it's something to observe. And that's why do I tell this to people? It's not, I'm not going to name anybody, it's not to put anybody down, it's so you and I don't fall for it. I don't want to make it big on social media, and hopefully you don't. Because it's fake, it's artificial, it's not real. And if we look at teenagers, this is what they're falling into. Why do more and more girls want to look skinny, anorexic, put the whole world's makeup on? Because they want to look like that girl in the magazine or the girl on TikTok. Boys are the same. Gym is a good thing, gym is fantastic. Gym helps with mental health. But are you just going to the gym for your TikTok views, for Instagram views? And then, like I said, sometimes, because they can't keep up with it, they also end up with mental health issues. Now moving on, Islamically, where does Islam come into all of this then? The topic is mental health in Islam. So, Islam believes in the mind, the body, your outside, and your soul. Yeah, everybody agree with that? Your mind, we focus a lot on your mind, your body, look after your body, and your soul. So when it comes to the body, it's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that he was once telling some companions who said, we're not going to sleep with our wives, we're not going to eat nice food, and basically asceticism. And they said, we're just going to worship. Yeah? So the Prophet ﷺ told them, Inna li rabbika alayka haqqa, inna li nafsika alayka haqqa, that your Lord has a right over you, that you do worship Him. Yeah? Farz was compulsory, the 5 salah, and then you can do nawafil as well. There's no harm. But you don't do so much that you're depriving your wife and children of their rights. And that's the next part of the hadith. وَإِنَّ لِأَهْلِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا. And your family also has rights over you. وَإِنَّ لِجَسَدِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا. Even your body has rights over you. This is where the psychology and this is where mental health comes in. Because a lot of people who just worship, and don't twist my words to somebody who goes home, somebody who prays Quran, somebody who does a lot of dhikr and prays nawafil and says, oh, Maulvi Sahib said from tomorrow we don't go masjid. Maulvi Sahib never said that. Maulvi Sahib said keep a balance. And I remember a couple of years ago, especially when we had the lockdown, this is why a lot of people suffered. Because the masjids were closed and they had routines in the masjid, which is a very good thing, by the way, very good thing. But then if the masjid is closed, Allah's doors aren't closed. There's other ways to do it. But what was the other way is sitting with your wife and doing ta'aleem, sitting with your kids and reading Quran. And a lot of men couldn't deal with it. Let's be honest. It's because they were so used to masjid environment, sitting in a corner, being alone. Nobody bother me, nobody touch me, nobody yell at me. So there has to be a balance. You can't spend hours and hours and hours in the masjid and you're not spending time with your wife and children. And vice versa. You may get some women as well who spend a lot of time in ibadah and they don't fulfill the rights of their husbands. It happens. So that's the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And in the end he says, give each one their rights. So even your body, how do you give your body rights? What do you think the rights of the body are? Anybody? Sleeping is one, which we all love. There's nothing wrong with it. I love sleeping. It's not a bad thing. Rest, okay, if it's not sleeping, rest. Resting can be what you could, some of you could be resting now, you're just listening. You're not really exercising or keeping busy or doing something very active, you're just listening. It's your Saturday night, it's your rest. What's another way of giving your body rights? Very good, mashallah. Eating healthy. So avoiding unhealthy foods, what we call junk foods, fizzy drinks. Yeah, you will all have a can once in a while, but eating junk food every day, having fizzy drink every day, may go against that. What's another way you can give your body its rights? Exercise. So if you do have a lot of unhealthy food, then make sure your exercise matches that. Not that you're having 7 takeaways a week and then you say, yeah, walk to the masjid, but then you live next to the masjid. That's not really exercise. So exercise is something promoted. Another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which he mentions that the strong believer is better and more beloved to Allah than the weak believer. And no way should anybody misinterpret this to think that if they're weak or physically that Allah doesn't love them. What it's trying to say, you could be, doesn't have to mean you have to be a black belt. You could be low in weight physically, but you wake up for Fajr. You come to masjid regular. Yeah? You're out there doing da'wah. That's a strong believer. You invite other people to Islam. So mentally you're strong as well. It's not always about physical strength. What it's trying to say, the hadith, is that somebody who's lazy. Somebody who's lazy and just eats and sleeps. That's the weak believer. Once Umar radiallahu anhu, he saw a group of companions in the masjid. And it was like daytime. And they were just sat there. Some of them were reading Quran for hours and hours, doing dhikr for hours and hours. So he looked and said, who are you? What are you doing? They said, we are the mutawakkilun. We are the mutawakkilun. We are the ones who rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what they meant by that is, we don't need to work. We don't need to physically go out there. We don't need to do anything. Allah will send it, the dastarkhan from the heavens. So Umar radiallahu anhu, with his stern and firm nature, he got very angry. He said, you are not mutawakkilun, you are mutawakilun. Which means you are lazy. This is not the way for sustenance. Islam promotes working. Yeah? Many of the prophets, they used to work as well for their bread and butter. So Islam always promotes that. Islam does not promote that you sit at home and, how can I say, misuse the benefit system, let's say. Misuse the benefit system. Those who need it, those who are disadvantaged, those who have medical issues, no problem. But those who abuse the system, it's good to ask a local alim what that might come under, fraud or haram. But it's definitely not the way that Islam promotes. So Islam always promotes us to be active, to engage, to be productive. Yeah? And I'm going to specifically say this to men. Allah knows best what's happening to men in this day and age, but we see men taking steps backwards and the women are in the forefront. Someone might disagree with me. In your household you might be doing that, but the statistics don't show that. Men are definitely going backwards. There's a lot of women who do a lot of things out there, mashallah, deen, dunya, family. And unfortunately, the men, we are lacking. And this is why I specifically said at the start that do we all believe we can suffer from mental health issues? We can suffer from spiritual issues, we can suffer from medical issues. Nobody is greater than the Prophets alayhimus salam. The verse I read at the start was in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. Everybody know the story of Yusuf alayhi salam? I don't want to go into it, but then the 11 brothers, they threw Yusuf alayhi salam into a well. Yaqub alayhi salam loved him very much. Very much. And he missed him for years, to the point he started thinking he's dead, because that's what the brothers claimed. And he used to cry so much, the Quran says, وَابْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ, his eyes whitened, min al-huzn, from grief. How can your eyes whiten from grief? It's a metaphor which basically means he went blind. وَابْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ means he cried so much. Imagine that crying. I don't know anybody in today's day and age who cried so much that he's lost his eyesight. There may be, I'm not saying there isn't, but I don't know of anybody. Anybody heard of that in this day and age? Okay. People do lose a parent, a son. Maybe your son or daughter was run over, or you lost a child, a baby, a miscarriage. People cry. People cry for weeks, people cry for months. Yaqub alayhi salam, a prophet of Allah, he cried so much he became blind out of the love of Yusuf alayhi salam. That's Quran, yeah? There's a lot of things I will say which will not be from Quran, will be history and stats and psychology based, but this is Quran. We can't debate with this. So when people say, I am macho man, I am Superman, I'm alpha male, I'm this and I'm that, I don't suffer grief. What are you talking about, you woman? That's what people say. That's for women. Yeah, women cry more. The Prophet ﷺ, yeah, that was Yaqub alayhi salam. The Prophet ﷺ had a whole year called Amul Huzn. What was Amul Huzn? The year of grief is the literal meaning. What happened in the year of grief? He lost Khadija radiallahu anha, number one, and Abu Talib, who he loved very much. Even though Abu Talib didn't die as a Muslim, he supported the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ loved him and he loved the Prophet ﷺ. Two of his most passionate supporters he lost in 1 year. It wasn't a day of grief. So you know when I said people cry for a day or a week or a month, it's called Amul Huzn. Am is year, a year of grief. That means the Prophet ﷺ was saddened. He was emotional for a whole year. A year. And the men of today tell me we don't cry. Grief can't strike us. We need to look at perspective. Are you greater than the Prophet ﷺ? Everybody loses somebody. Yeah, everybody's lost somebody at one point, whether it's your parents, grandparents, everybody loses somebody. And we all have that one somebody who is close to us, who we love. And sometimes we love them more than we love ourselves. The Prophet ﷺ dearly loved Khadija radiallahu anha. So that was known as Amul Huzn. So these were just two examples. Even the example of Hamza radiallahu anhu. Hamza radiallahu anhu, what happened? He was the beloved uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah, he was a fighter, he was a warrior, he was a soldier, he was brave. And what happened is when they mutilated his body, the Prophet ﷺ started crying. And when he cried, his words that came out were that they mutilated his body. I wish I could leave his body as it is, so it could be eaten by vultures. Why did the Prophet ﷺ say this? Anybody know why would the Prophet ﷺ want to leave his uncle's body to be eaten by vultures? Because on the day of Qiyamah, you will be raised how you died. So the Prophet ﷺ said, if it was not for my auntie, Hamza's wife, I would have left it so that he would be eaten by vultures, and on the day of judgment, he would be raised from the stomachs of vultures. I could say my uncle is the greatest martyr, but he didn't do that. He read the janazah of Hamza radiallahu anhu 70 times, repeatedly. Is this not a man who was grieving? Does Islam not allow us to grieve and cry and get emotional? This is for men, yeah? We don't need to tell the women. We don't need to tell the women. This is just for the men. Yeah? Soften your hearts, brothers. Don't think that you are greater than this. Why? Why do I need you to do that, and why do we need to do that? Because people who suffer these issues, grief and emotion and anxiety and depression, men who don't address it, does it affect me? Wallahi, does it affect me? If some of you ignore this whole talk tonight, you switch off at home, I'm going to go to sleep at night, inshallah. I'm going to go to sleep. But it will affect your family, husband and wife relationships. It affects your children. It affects your mother and father. The young ones here, the teenagers. That's who it affects. That when you think you're greater than this, that mental health can't affect me. And this is why I'm emphasizing for men. And this talk, when I intended it, there'll be many women listening at home, my intention was for men. The women are out there, the women will do their counseling, they will do what they need to, they will support and promote the mental health amongst each other. But amongst the men, it's a very taboo subject. We don't think we will ever have these issues. Now, very briefly, inshallah, I mentioned at the start that a lot of mental health issues, psychology, counseling, the founders were non-Muslim, Westerners, white people. And when we do the myths, inshallah, in a few minutes, the myths of mental health, that's one of the myths that basically these people, Freud, Coleridge, etc., the people they were experimenting on were middle-class white people. So then people think mental health issues and counseling is just for white people because the founders were white. But I'm going to very briefly mention some of the Muslim names who were the founders of psychology and in the Islamic world. So the first one is Avicenna, who in the Muslim world is known as Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina rahmatullah alayhi was one of the first, and if you read his books you will find a lot about Islamic psychology, Islamic counseling. Second one was Al-Kindi rahmatullah alayhi, who focused a lot on dreams. Yeah, Freud also focused on dreams and interpretation. Something about dreams, be very careful. Sometimes people who suffer mental health issues, spiritual issues, get very deep into dreams. There's a lot of fabrications out there, a lot of soothsayers out there. You get Dr. Dream and Mr. Dream and on Instagram and these sort of things, and they just make money, I'll be honest. They'll put heads and tail together and make money out of your story. Be very careful in dream interpretations. Obviously part of Islam, dreams are true, but dreams are also shaitan, and a lot of dreams are just your thoughts. Another name is Ali ibn Sahal Rabbani, who wrote a famous book, Firdaus al-Hikmah, the Paradise of Wisdom. Why am I mentioning these names is that so you know that whether it's counseling, psychology, psychiatry, it's not just non-Muslims. So Ali ibn Sahal Rabbani had one of the oldest encyclopedias on medicine. If you put his name into Google, you'll see a lot of articles about him. Then Imam Razi rahmatullahi alayh, whose name again they kind of changed to Razis, but it is Imam Razi rahmatullahi alayh. He had the largest encyclopedia which he wrote. He focused a lot on diseases of the head, child development, etc. Abu Zayd al-Balkhi rahmatullahi alayh, who focused a lot on CBT, what we know as CBT, yeah? Which focuses on thoughts and mind. That what you think of, what's in your mind will lead to an action. And if you don't have that, then a person can't be active and productive. So, for example, it focuses a lot on patterns of flawed thinking. People who over-exaggerate and over-generalize things. For example, a person, he can't get a job. Yeah, he can't get a job. He failed one interview. Oh, I can never get a job. Why can't you never get a job? Because you failed one interview. Yeah, a person had an argument with somebody, he fought with somebody. Nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. Over-generalizing things. So CBT focuses a lot of this on this, thoughts and emotions, etc. And the last name is a very famous name which I'm sure we've all heard of, Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh. Imam Ghazali focused a lot in his Ihya Ulumuddin, his famous book, on spiritual issues. Spiritual, how it is connected to psychological. So he focuses a lot on the nafs. So even in the Western books, you'll get nafs, soul, ego, they'll focus on these things. So Islamically, we have three types of nafs, three souls. One is the highest level, nafs mutma'inna. Yeah, when your soul only attracts you to do good things, which is in the Quran, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna, that oh pious soul, irji'i ila rabbika radiyatan mardiyah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enter this sort of soul into paradise. The second soul is nafs lawwama, which is the critical one, which is always critiquing whether something is good or bad. So it's in between. If you're going to do something bad, it'll stop you. And then the third one is the evil soul, nafs ammara. So you try and remember these names, Mutma'inna, Lawama, and Ammara, Nafsi Ammara is the evil soul. Inna nafsa ammaratum bisu, always tells you to do evil things. So Imam Ghazali focused a lot on this, how spiritual is connected to psychological. And one other fact I want to mention about Muslims and Islam is that the first psychiatric ward was in 705 CE in Baghdad, Muslim country made by the Muslims. And I'm going to quickly mention some of the things they focus on, the little things, but anybody who's been through psychological issues or anybody with mental disorders, mental health issues, they're quite big issues, I'd say, how these wards were made. So they focused on giving them very clean clothing, not just any sort of clothing, like white clothing, good colors as well, because this affects the mind. The second thing is they would ensure that they had a bath every single day, cleanliness, tahara. The third thing is that they made sure they ate hot meals and healthy food. Somebody mentioned healthy food earlier, about mental health here, having healthy food. So these things were put into place. And if we look at just these three things, there's many other things, a whole list. Allah says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah says that when I made human beings, I honored him. I made him in a dignified manner. I gave him respect. So self-respect is big in Islam. Allah gave you respect. Respect yourself. How do you respect yourself? How you look. Yeah? You got a beard, mashallah, it's sunnah, comb it. You got hair, look after it. You got clothes, keep them clean. And this is why the first three things were very important. Bathing regularly, showering regularly. Because they knew this affected a person mentally, psychologically. Where did they put these psychiatric wards? In the middle of the town. Why would they put them in the middle of a town? Because of easy access, very good. They didn't put them in the countryside or far away so nobody come and visit them. They put them in the middle of the town, so because of human interaction. So their families, the local imam, whoever it would come, visit them, and human interaction is good for your mental health. Again, back to those people who stick themselves on their phones and social media, very dangerous. Very dangerous that you don't ever talk to anybody. You could be in a room full of 12 people and sometimes the whole 12 are. What we see sometimes when we go out with families, friends in a restaurant, there's a dozen people around the table but everybody's. What's the point of going out then? What's the point of going out? You're not even interested in the food of the people around your conversation. So that's why they put these psychiatric wards in the middle of the town centre, so they can have more visitors. And around these psychiatric wards there were nice gardens, trees, flowers, plants, good things to look at. So they were thought of, yeah? It wasn't just like Bolton Royal Hospital or Blackburn Royal Hospital and just dumped anywhere and then the hospital just stinks of bleach all the time. But these things were thought out. They even had people called murafiqun. The murafiqun were people who were helpers, companions. You could say volunteers who would come and talk to them. A bit like a chaplain, what a chaplain does. But there'd be many of them. They would come, ask about their daily routine, if they needed anything. So these things were invented by the Muslims, and the environments generally were relaxing, soothing environments. I've mentioned these things simply because I'm not saying anybody is going to end up in a psychiatric ward. These are the things which help your mental health. So even for us, alhamdulillah, sitting here, many brothers and sisters listening at home, if you feel you're stressed, you've got tension, you've got anxiety, maybe go in a nice garden, drive somewhere. Don't let the cold weather, don't let winter stop you. Yeah, sometimes for Asian people, winter, rain stops us. Rain is also therapeutic, walking in the rain. Try it without an umbrella. Yeah, you'll get wet, you won't die. Otherwise, claim it from the masjid, not from me. Inshallah, you won't. So, one other thing they focused on in the psychiatric wards was they didn't make people feel bad or worse than they already were. They didn't say, oh, tu pagal hai. Pagal khana mein chale jaan. That word pagal khana is a dangerous word on its own. Yeah. Even mental, obviously mental is not a good word, because when we come on to the myths, one of the myths I've got written down is, I'm not mental, I don't need counselling. I'm not mental. You don't have to be mental to go for counselling or to seek help. So they didn't make people feel worse, and that's why these environments were really soothing and comforting, and people felt peaceful. You didn't have to be labelled. Or you know him, he's in that psychiatric ward because he's goners, he's thick, he's mental, he's these sort of words. So again, it's a lesson for us as well. If somebody's suffering from a bit of anxiety or depression or sadness, there's no need to put them down. You need to uplift them. You need to do what the Murafiqun did. And that's what they would do in their talks. They would give hope about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They would talk about good things. And that's one thing I think in this day and age we really need, is positivity. A lot of people have their issues because of the lack of positivity. Always negative, always complaining, always magnifying small issues. Like the examples I gave earlier. You had one little tiff with somebody and boom, people hate me. I hate people. I'm anti-people. Like 7 billion people are against you. Sometimes it's how you overcome things, and this is when a person is mentally stronger, he will be able to do this. So now inshallah we will come on to some of the myths that people have and why they don't seek help, why they're against mental health, why they're against counselling, and sometimes people don't even go to the doctors because of these things. So one, I've already mentioned that mental health is for white people, it's for Europeans because it was founded by these people. It doesn't affect me, I'm Muslim. I've got Iman. Yeah? Totally wrong. The founders may be Carl Rogers, Freud and others, but I've mentioned a lot of Muslims who are into psychology and people who created the psychiatric wards. Who was that then? And that was 700 years ago. So many years ago that basically Muslims would have suffered mental health issues. Another one is people think, what are you going to get out of talking? And this is a common one. And I used to think this myself as well, before I got into counselling, that what does talking do? Yeah, you need to more than talking. When a person offloads who has a lot on his chest, and you listen attentively, you listen actively, the person feels it. Yeah? Maybe there's one or two of you, that it's been about 40 minutes now, so you're probably diverted, distracted. I don't think anybody's checked their phone, not that I've been looking, but mashallah, well done, 40 minutes without the phone. So you're probably thinking, when's this guy going to finish? I'm hungry, my stomach's rumbling, what's on the menu? So then a person will pick it up. I'm not going to pick it up because there's a lot of you in this room. But when you still have a one-to-one and the person is distracted, you know from his eyes he's distracted. You can tell how he's sitting, he's distracted. But when a person listens to you passionately, actively, just by listening, it has an effect. Try it someday. Because this is what they promote in counselling. It's not just listening. Yeah, they even differentiate between hearing and listening. There's a difference between listening and hearing, and that's what counselling is about. And there's got to be genuinity. Someone can't just say to me, yeah, I had a fight with my wife today and threw my kids out. Yeah, alright, yeah, okay, yeah, alright, yeah. This guy's never going to come back. There's no passion there, there's no empathy there, you've not understood anything he's just said. Just tick the box, see you later. And sadly, this does happen, I'll be honest. This has put some people off counselling, particularly with CBT, particularly with the NHS, probably because of all the pressures, but that's what they feel. It's just a tick box, the guy didn't get me. But you have to be genuine. If you want to listen to people and you want to do something like this, it's about genuine. Even the questions they ask, they don't just ask questions random. These questions lead to something. It could lead to solving your problems. So talking and listening does help. It's a therapy. How many times, I think everybody in this room, maybe apart from the children, how many times have we had a bad day and you've ranted about it at home or on the phone to somebody and you felt better? Can anybody say, no, that doesn't work, that's not therapy, that's useless? Some of us do it all the time. Yeah, people who have difficult jobs and difficult employers maybe do it all the time. So what is that? That's offloading. And that is what happens in a counselling room. You offload even if you are angry, violent, swearing. Not that I promote that, but people do that and they feel better. And you're told to put up with it and be tolerant. Even if somebody swore, they wouldn't swear at you, but whatever they said. Because the person needs to offload. You'd rather have him offload here than offload to somebody else in the wrong way. So talking and listening is therapy. There's many other ways of therapy. It's not just the talking. Sometimes they make you write things. There's art therapy as well. Another myth is if you are weak, you are weak if you have mental health therapy. So basically, this is again the macho men, or if there's macho women that exist. I've already mentioned about the Prophet ﷺ. He also went through psychological issues when he buried his own wife, his son Abu Talib. The Quran even says, فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ. It's very close, you will destroy yourself if these people do not become Muslim. فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ أَلَّا يَكُونُ مُؤْمِنِينَ. What does that mean, that the Prophet ﷺ was going to destroy himself? What does it mean? It's not the physical body, back to mind, body, soul. It was more mentally. He was struck with grief, emotions. One might even say depression. Now why don't these people believe in Islam? Because if they don't believe in Islam, they will go to Jahannam. So that's the Quran again. Counseling negates trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you go for counseling, and I'm going to make this broader, if you seek any help, some people have this notion, if you go to doctors, you don't have tawakkul. If you go for hijama, you don't have tawakkul. If you seek advice for spiritual issues, somebody has nazar hasad, you don't have tawakkul. It's wrong. The Prophet ﷺ also saw cupping, other medical issues. The Sahaba did this. So are we greater than the Sahaba? Your tawakkul is mashallah like Musa alayhi salam. It's wrong. When you go to a doctor, he treats you, but you believe Allah cures. And that's very important, by the way. A lot of us have forgotten this. Over time, we just go to doctors and say, "A doctor Buhara." Yeah, you say it, but really, you shouldn't say that. He might be a good person, but it's Allah that gives shifa. It's not the doctor. Because when you say a doctor Buhara, means the doctor cures. This guy can actually cure. Whereas Dr. B is absolutely useless. But really the problem can be with the person on your tawakkul and iman. So I always give an example. If two people have a headache, two people take a paracetamol, one gets cured, the other doesn't. The one who got cured possibly believes that Allah cures, and B believes the paracetamol cures. So Allah didn't give him shifa. I say it because I see it in a lot of people, that some people get better very quickly, and some people for years and years and years, because they're on the Dr. Buhara. You have to remember Allah cures. Nobody does counseling in our community. That's why we don't do it. That there's no counsellors, there's nobody who goes for counselling, so what's the point? So do we depend on the community for my mental health? So if you go doctors, I go doctors. If you go counselling, I go counselling. Yeah, if you seek therapy, I'll seek therapy. It doesn't work like that. You do what's right. Yeah, people travel to other countries, don't they? India, Pakistan, America for good doctors. So if people can do that, don't base it on the community. And one of the reasons of this talk is that communities start opening up. They open their doors for men and women, even masajid, inshallah, which we'll come on to, hopefully at the end, how masajid can also open the doors and help. Now these next myths are specifically for men. These are the men's myths. So men say these things. The others were general. Number one is that I'm strong and I don't need help. I think we've covered that. But you've got to understand, if you think that I'm strong physically or mentally, you've had 99 fights, you're a boxer, and you won't suffer from mental health. There's many athletes who suffer from mental health, many footballers, even boxers and wrestlers who suffer from mental health. Number one. Number two, if you ask me, seeking help is the real strength. If you're a man, then go to the doctors, go for counselling. To me, that's real strength. The second myth of men is counselling's just for women. Counselling is just for women. It's a woman's thing. I don't need counselling. So like I mentioned, all those names in the Muslim world were all men. There wasn't a single female I mentioned. In the Western world, they were all men. So the founders are all men. So you think all these men created it for women? Trust me, they're not that generous. It's for men and women. It's very important. It's a bit like the world's top chefs are men. Yeah, not being stereotypical. But some of the world's greatest chefs, there's women as well, but some of the greatest chefs out there are men. But who does the cooking every day? Women. So to say that is wrong, that is just for women. The founders were men, even in the Islamic world, behind Islamic psychology, were men. I don't have a problem. Another myth, another thing men say, I don't have a problem, there's nothing wrong with me. And that requires a bit of humility. That's not just in mental health issues. There's a lot of men who have medical issues. Yeah, 3 years ago when we were going through lockdown, how many men tested positive for coronavirus? Not isolating, you're having a laugh, going to work. Hero, isn't he? He's macho, He-Man. That's the problem. So if you don't have a problem, some of these men, what we ask them is, how come you're up all night till 2, 3, 4 in the morning? How come you have an addiction, drugs, alcohol? How come you beat your wife up? How come you've not been going to work for the last 4 months? If you don't have a problem. Because that's the signs. Obviously we don't say it to all men, but men who have these sort of problems, their families are complaining. When you address it, I don't have a problem. There's nothing wrong with me. Number 5 is I'm not mental. What I said earlier, I'm not mental, I'm not crazy. To have mental health issues, you have to be absolutely psycho. No, you don't. Anxiety, depression, sadness, grief. So these sort of people, what they need guidance, they need uplifting. Now, I'm going to quickly mention about the depression one, and a bit about anxiety, inshallah, then we'll wrap up. So sometimes people try to differentiate and say, I've not got depression, I'm just going through a bit of sadness. What's the difference between depression and sadness? Anybody know a good example? G? Very good, very good. Okay. Yeah, that is one of the things I've got as well. So basically, sadness is there. Sadness is temporary, is less time. And it's like the brother said, if a person, for example, he can't do his daily duties working, he stopped working, like I said, for 4 months, 3 months, he's just not going into work. He doesn't sleep the whole night. He stopped talking to people. That's not sadness. That's deep. That's going into depression. Sadness is everything other than that. When it's a day, 1 or 2 days, something small happened, a person goes through sadness. Depression is much greater than that, much deeper. And this is why in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions a verse about sadness, grief, anxiety, about the people of Jannah. وَقَالُ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ الَّذِي أَذْهَبَ عَنِّ الْحَزَنِ إِنَّ رَبَّنَا لَغَفُورٌ شَكُورٌ. That when people of paradise will enter paradise, Allah make us from them, they will say, all praise to Allah who has took away from us sadness, grief, anxiety. Inna Rabbana la ghafurun shakur. Our Lord is most grateful and most forgiving. So this is one quality of the people of Jannah as well. They will never suffer sadness, anxiety, depression. Forever they will be happy. So it's something that people do go through for different reasons. It could be you've lost somebody, you lost your job, you're going through divorce, a death, your business went down. But one thing that escalates it usually is also mentioned in hadith, the kalimatu law taftahu amal al-shaytan, that if a person says, if I had done this, it wouldn't have happened. If I didn't do this, ifs. And that person dives deeper into depression because he's going to keep regretting. And that's why hadith also mentions the kalimatul law. Law in Arabic is if. If I didn't marry this woman, if I didn't get this car, if I didn't buy this house, if I didn't take this loan, if I didn't get this mortgage, if I had gone to see my dad in the hospital before he died, and now I didn't see him and now I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. What's done is done, brothers and sisters. The pens have been lifted, the ink has dried. You can't bring back time. Yeah? It's the only thing we can't do. We can't bring back time. And that lands a person in deep depression when he keeps on thinking about the ifs and the buts. So that's a hadith as well, which I wanted to mention. A lot of regret. So how do you overcome this is believe in taqdeer. This is where taqdeer kicks in, which is a very long subject, complicated, but the basics of it is what's happened is happened. The pens have lifted, the ink has dried, whatever Allah has written. If somebody died, if your child had an accident because you slipped their hand and they crossed the road, It's done, it was written. If you lost a baby, it was written, Allah can give you more. If you had a bad spouse, a bad husband, bad wife, Allah can give you another one. Yeah? If Allah can give you something when you didn't ask for it, yeah, if you got married and you didn't really want to, you got a job, you didn't want that job, you had a house, what if you ask Allah for it? He's going to give you something better. And finally, coming on to anxiety. Anxiety is a very broad term. And it's something where I say every single person at some stage in his life will go through some level of anxiety. And the biggest example was those 3 years ago when we were going through lockdown. Everybody went through one of these, whether it was depression, sadness or anxiety. Let's be honest. Yeah? Now, anxiety comes in different stages. People get it for different reasons. Social settings, work, sitting on a stage like I'm doing and talking, people get anxiety. People have an exam, they get anxiety. So there's clinical anxiety. For example, a person has a test or an exam. So the first person, he's just anxious for the test. He gets like a knot in his stomach, but he's going to go and do it. Person B, who's deeper form of anxiety, he's worried about going to the test. Forget taking it, I don't think I'm going to make it to school or madrasa or your driving test. This is anxiety. Allah says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. Yeah? In Surah Balad, a surah which many of us will know, Allah says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created mankind in constant struggle. Nobody said life was going to be easy. And people who say that and teach their kids that, have always been against that. If you tell your kid, beta, don't worry, life is okay. Mummy, Papa made it through, you're going to make it through. That's the biggest lie you ever told to your kids. Does that mean you go home and scare your kids? No. You got to tell them about your struggles in life. You got to tell them what you did when you were growing up in the 80s and 90s and how things are easy for them now. But let's be honest, the constant battles and struggles these kids face is a lot worse than those of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s. Social media is the biggest one. Yeah, these kids are thinking of waking up in the morning, going to school, worrying if they're going to change their gender and orientation. These sort of things. So you can't tell your kids that life is easy. Allah says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. So if you don't believe me, believe the Quran. Allah created us in constant struggle. How many times have you been in a difficulty? You got out of it and light at the end of the tunnel. Another one comes. Got out of it, another problem. Yeah. Like the bachelor who thinks all married men are nice and happy, he gets married, this is another problem. Then he gets kids, this is another problem. Then his kids grow up, he has another problem, getting his kids married. Then he has grandchildren, he has another problem. Then he has work problems, then he's worried about death. Problem after problem after problem, because the only place where there will be no problems, inshallah, is ad-dunya sijnul mu'min. That this world is a prison for the believer. وَجَنَّةُ الْكَافِرِ. And you should always remind yourself of this. When you go through problems, this world was never paradise for us. If everything was easy, then what's the